You know what keeps me up at night sometimes? It's this one simple question that completely changed how I think about human history. I was reading about the Pleistocene extinction, that massive die-off that happened around 12,000 years ago, where we lost most of Earth's megafauna. Massive creatures that had dominated the planet for millions of years just disappeared. But here's what struck me. While saber-toothed cats, giant short-faced bears, cave lions, dire wolves, and dozens of other apex predators were going extinct, there was one species that wasn't just surviving. It was thriving and spreading across the entire globe. Us, humans. And this isn't just about the last 12,000 years. For tens of thousands of years before that great extinction, our ancestors were living alongside creatures that were essentially living nightmares. We were talking about a world where stepping outside your shelter meant potentially facing animals that could kill you in seconds. Animals that were bigger, stronger, faster, and had been perfecting their predatory skills for millions of years. Think about it this way. If you took a modern human, stripped away all our technology, all our accumulated knowledge, all our infrastructure, and dropped them into the world of 30,000 years ago, how long do you think they'd survive? A week? A day? Yet our ancestors didn't just survive in that world, they conquered it. When I first started researching this topic, I expected to find stories of humans cowering in caves, barely scraping by, living in constant terror. What I found instead was the emergence of the most successful predator and survivor the planet had ever seen. Our ancestors weren't victims in this story. They were the ultimate apex predator. But how? How did relatively small, not particularly fast, definitely not particularly strong humans manage to not just coexist with these monsters, but eventually outlast every single one of them? How did we go from being potential prey to becoming the dominant species on the planet? The answer isn't what you might expect. It's not a story about bigger clubs or sharper spears. It's about something much more profound. It's about the birth of human intelligence, cooperation, and adaptability on a scale that had never existed before in the history of life on Earth. Over the next hour, we're going to journey back to one of the most dangerous periods in human history and discover the incredible survival strategies that kept our species alive. We'll explore how our ancestors learned to use fire not just for warmth, but as a weapon. We'll see how they developed hunting techniques so sophisticated that they could take down animals 10 times their size. And we'll uncover how they created the first human networks, systems of knowledge sharing and cooperation that gave them an insurmountable advantage over every other species on the planet. This isn't just a story about survival. It's about the birth of human civilization itself. Because everything that makes us human today, our language, our technology, our ability to work together toward common goals, all of it traces back to those critical moments when our ancestors first learned how to thrive in a world of monsters. So let's go back. Let's go back to a time when the night was truly dark and full of terrors, and discover how our ancestors didn't just survive that darkness, they learned to master it. Chapter 1. Welcome to the Pleistocene. To understand the incredible achievement of human survival, you first need to understand just how hostile the world of our ancestors really was. We're talking about the late Pleistocene epoch, roughly 126,000 to 11,700 years ago, with a particular focus on the period between 50,000 and 12,000 years ago, when modern humans were spreading across the globe. This was during the last ice age, but don't think of it as just a colder version of today's world. The Pleistocene was an entirely different planet, one where the rules of survival were written by creatures that had been perfecting the art of killing for millions of years. Let's start with the landscape itself. Imagine vast steppes stretching endlessly in every direction, punctuated by dense, impenetrable forests where the canopy was so thick that sunlight barely reached the ground. In the north, tundra extended far beyond what we see today, while in other regions, Grasslands supported herds of animals so massive they would dwarf anything in the modern world. The climate wasn't just cold, it was unpredictable. Temperature swings of 20 degrees Fahrenheit could happen within a single generation. Seasons were longer and more extreme. Resources that were abundant one year might be completely unavailable the next. This was in a world where you could count on consistency. Adaptation and flexibility weren't just advantages. They were absolute requirements for survival. But it wasn't the environment that made this world so dangerous. It was the other inhabitants. Let's start with the cave bear, Ursus spelaeus. When we hear cave bear, we might think of a slightly larger version of a modern brown bear. We couldn't be more wrong. Cave bears were absolute giants. The largest specimens weighed over 2,200 pounds. That's literally heavier than a Honda Civic. Their skulls alone were 18 inches long, and their jaws could exert enough pressure to crush the femur of a woolly mammoth. But here's what made them truly terrifying. Despite their name, cave bears weren't just hiding in caves. Recent research has shown that they were active hunters, and they were incredibly territorial. A cave bear's territory could span hundreds of square miles, and they would aggressively defend it against any intruder, including humans. And cave bears weren't even the worst of it. In North America, there was Arctodus simus, the short-faced bear, also known as the bulldog bear. This animal was built like nature's version of a monster truck. Standing 12 feet tall on its hind legs and weighing up to 1,500 pounds, the short-faced bear had incredibly long legs and a lean, powerful build that was clearly designed for one thing: running down prey. This bear could reach speeds of 40 miles per hour. To put that in perspective, the fastest human ever recorded, Usain Bolt, topped out at 27.8 miles per hour, and he could only maintain that speed for a few seconds. The short-faced bear could maintain 40 miles per hour for extended periods while chasing down prey across open terrain. But bears were just the beginning of your problems in the Pleistocene. The real apex predators were the cats. Smilodon fatalis, the saber-toothed cat, is probably the most famous. But there were actually several species of saber-toothed cats, each evolved for different hunting strategies. Smilodon populator, found in South America, was the largest cat that ever lived, weighing up to 880 pounds. Its canine teeth were 7 inches long, and its jaw could open to an angle of 120 degrees, wide enough to get those sabers around the throat of a massive ground sloth or a young mastodon. But Smilodon wasn't just big, it was incredibly strong. Its forelimbs were more muscular than those of any modern big cat. This wasn't an animal that chased down prey. It was an ambush predator that could take down animals several times its own size with a single, perfectly placed bite to the throat or skull. Then there was Panthera atrox, the American lion. This wasn't just a larger version of an African lion. American lions were 25% bigger than modern lions, with males weighing up to 500 pounds. But more importantly, they were solitary hunters, which meant they had to be incredibly efficient killers. Unlike modern lions that hunt in prides, each American lion had to be capable of taking down large prey entirely on its own. In Europe and Asia, you had cave lions, Panthera spelaea, which were similarly massive and, based on cave paintings, appear to have been maneless. These lions were perfectly adapted to the cold climate and were apparently common enough that early humans encountered them regularly, as evidenced by the numerous cave paintings depicting them. But perhaps the most persistent threat came from the wolves. Not modern wolves, dire wolves. Canis dirus was about 25% heavier than the largest modern wolves, with a more robust build and incredibly powerful jaws. But what made dire wolves truly dangerous wasn't their individual size. It was their pack behavior. Evidence suggests that dire wolf packs could number 30 or more individuals. Imagine facing not one or two wolves, but an entire coordinated pack of these massive predators. each one weighing up to 150 pounds with bite forces that could crack bone. Modern wolf packs typically number 5 to 8 individuals, and they're already incredibly effective hunters. A pack of 30 dire wolves would have been nearly unstoppable. And we haven't even talked about the scavengers yet. Giant hyenas, massive vultures with 12-foot wingspans, and cave hyenas that were larger than modern spotted hyenas. These animals didn't just clean up after kills. They actively competed for fresh meat, and they wouldn't hesitate to attack a human who got between them and a meal. In some regions, early humans also had to contend with other human species. Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Asia, and possibly other archaic human populations we haven't even identified yet. These weren't just competitors for resources. In some cases, there's evidence of direct conflict and even cannibalism between different human groups. But here's what really puts this in perspective. Most of these animals had been at the top of the food chain for millions of years. Saber-toothed cats had been perfecting their killing techniques for over 15 million years. Bears had been dominating northern ecosystems for 5 million years. These weren't new species struggling to find their place in the ecosystem. These were the undisputed masters of their environment. And into this world walked our ancestors. Homo sapiens, a species that had only existed for a few 100,000 years, with no natural weapons, no thick hide, no massive teeth or claws. They couldn't run faster than a horse, couldn't fight a cave bear and win, couldn't climb better than the cats or swim better than the aquatic predators. By every measure of individual physical capability, humans should have been easy prey. They should have been just another item on the menu for these apex predators. Instead, within a few tens of thousands of years, almost every one of these monsters was extinct, and humans had spread to every continent on Earth. So what happened? What did our ancestors have that these perfectly adapted predators didn't? The answer is something that had never existed before in the history of life on Earth, and it changed everything. Chapter 2. The Human Revolution. Here, that's what's absolutely mind-blowing about early humans. They didn't try to outmuscle the megafauna. They didn't evolve bigger teeth or thicker skin or faster running speeds. Instead, they did something unprecedented in the history of life on Earth. They outthought their competition. But when we talk about human intelligence as a survival tool, we're not just talking about being clever. We're talking about a completely new type of intelligence that had never existed before, one that was specifically evolved for survival, cooperation, and adaptation in hostile environments. Let's start with pattern recognition. Modern humans can look at tracks in mud and not only identify what animal made them, but determine how long ago it passed, whether it was injured, what it had been eating, and where it was likely heading. This might sound simple, but it represents incredibly sophisticated neural processing. Our ancestors were essentially living databases of environmental information, constantly collecting, analyzing, and updating their understanding of the world around them. Archaeological evidence shows that by 40,000 years ago, humans were creating detailed mental maps of territories spanning hundreds of miles. They knew where water sources were located during different seasons, which plants were edible at which times of year, where different animals could be found during their migration patterns, and how all of these factors changed based on weather conditions, seasons, and even multi-year cycles. But individual intelligence was just the beginning. What made humans truly unstoppable was collective intelligence, the ability to share, build upon, and preserve knowledge across generations and across groups. Think about what this meant in practical terms. When a hunter discovered that cave bears were more active and aggressive during late summer when they were preparing for hibernation, that knowledge didn't die with him. It became part of the group's collective understanding. When someone figured out that certain types of stone made better spear points, or that specific plants could be used to treat injuries, or that particular weather patterns indicated good hunting conditions, all of that information became part of a growing database of survival knowledge. But this wasn't just about sharing information within a single group. Evidence suggests that human groups were trading information across vast distances. Stone tools found in archaeological sites often come from quarries hundreds of miles away, indicating not just trade networks, but information networks. Groups were sharing survival strategies across continents. This created something that had never existed before: cumulative cultural evolution. Each generation could build on the knowledge of the previous generation, continuously improving and refining survival techniques. While a saber-toothed cat in the year 30,000 BCE hunted exactly the same way as its ancestors had 100,000 years earlier, human hunting techniques were constantly evolving, becoming more sophisticated with each passing generation. But intelligence alone wasn't enough. What made humans truly dangerous was how they applied that intelligence through unprecedented levels of cooperation. Modern hunter-gatherer groups typically consist of 25 to 50 individuals, but archaeological evidence suggests that early human groups could coordinate activities across much larger networks. When facing large predators or attempting to hunt massive prey like mammoths, multiple groups would come together, creating temporary hunting parties of 100 or more individuals. These weren't just random gatherings. They were highly organized operations with sophisticated command structures, specialized roles, and complex communication systems. Archaeological sites show evidence of planned hunts that were coordinated weeks or even months in advance, with groups positioning themselves at strategic locations along migration routes, preparing specialized equipment, and developing backup plans for different scenarios. The level of planning involved in these operations was extraordinary. Consider the mammoth hunting sites found across Eastern Europe. These weren't opportunistic kills. They were the result of careful observation, planning, and coordination. Groups would identify mammoth herds, track their movements, predict their routes, and then position hunting parties at strategic locations. They would dig pit traps, construct barriers to funnel the animals into specific areas, and coordinate attacks using signals that could be communicated across miles. But perhaps most importantly, humans developed something that no other species had ever achieved: the ability to rapidly adapt their behavior based on new information or changing circumstances. When early humans first encountered a new predator or moved into a new environment, they could observe, analyze, and develop new survival strategies within a single generation. Other species might take thousands of years to evolve new behaviors through natural selection, but humans could adapt their behavior in real time. We see this clearly in the archaeological record. When humans first arrived in Australia around 50,000 years ago, they encountered a completely new set of predators, including Megalania, a monitor lizard that was over 20 feet long and weighed up to 1,320 pounds. Within a few thousand years, these massive predators were extinct, while human populations were thriving across the continent. The same pattern repeated everywhere humans went. When they reached the Americas around 15,000 years ago, they encountered giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, American lions, short-faced bears, and dozens of other megafaunal species. Within a few thousand years, most of these animals were extinct. This wasn't just coincidence. It was the result of humans applying their intelligence in ways that these other species simply couldn't match. They could analyze an animal's behavior patterns, identify weaknesses, develop specific hunting strategies, and then teach those strategies to others, creating a collective knowledge base that grew stronger with each encounter. But intelligence and cooperation were just two parts of the equation. The third component, and perhaps the most important, was tool use on a scale that had never been seen before in the natural world. Now, humans weren't the first species to use tools. Chimpanzees use sticks to extract termites from mounds. Otters use rocks to crack open shells. Even some birds use tools for various purposes. But human tool use was different in several crucial ways. First, Humans made tools specifically for making other tools. They would create specialized implements for knapping flint, for working wood, for processing hides. This meta-tool use allowed them to create increasingly sophisticated equipment. Second, humans made tools for future use, not just immediate needs. They would spend days crafting the perfect spear point, even when they weren't currently hunting. They would create and maintain toolkits, constantly improving and refining their equipment. Third, and most importantly, humans made tools that extended their physical capabilities beyond what their biology allowed. A human with a spear was no longer just a vulnerable primate. They were a predator with a 6-foot reach and a sharp point. A human with an atlatl, spear thrower, could launch projectiles with more force than their arm strength alone could provide. But the real breakthrough came when humans learned to combine their intelligence, cooperation, and tool use in coordinated applications. This is when they stopped being prey and became the ultimate predator. Archaeological evidence shows that by 30,000 years ago, human hunting groups were using complex arrays of tools and techniques that required extensive coordination and planning. They were creating composite tools, spears with multiple components that could be repaired and modified for different purposes. They were using leverage devices that multiplied their physical strength. They were creating ranged weapons that allowed them to kill from a safe distance. Most importantly, they were sharing and improving these technologies across vast networks of human groups, creating a constantly evolving arsenal of survival tools that grew more sophisticated with each generation. This combination, intelligence, cooperation, and advanced tool use, created something entirely new in the natural world. For the first time in the history of life on Earth, there was a species that could adapt faster than natural selection, that could overcome physical limitations through technology, and that could coordinate complex behaviors across large groups and vast distances. The megafauna of the Pleistocene had evolved over millions of years to be perfect predators and perfect survivors in their specific environments. But they had never faced anything like this before. They had never faced a species that could observe their behavior, analyze their weaknesses, develop countermeasures, and then share those countermeasures with others. In the evolutionary arms race that followed, there was really only one possible outcome. The question wasn't whether humans would survive alongside these megafaunal species. The question was how quickly they would outcompete them. But none of this would have been possible without one crucial discovery that changed everything: the mastery of fire. Chapter 3. Fire. If I had to choose the single most important discovery in human history, more important than agriculture, more important than writing, more important than the wheel, it would be fire. Not just the use of fire, but the complete mastery of fire as a tool, a weapon, and a survival technology. Most people think of fire as something early humans used for warmth and cooking, and those uses were certainly important. But archaeological evidence shows that human mastery of fire was far more sophisticated and far more crucial for survival than we ever imagined. Fire didn't just make life easier for our ancestors. It made their survival possible in a world dominated by creatures that could kill them in seconds. Let's start with the most obvious advantage: protection. For most predators, fire represented something fundamentally terrifying and incomprehensible. These animals had evolved over millions of years with an instinctive fear of wildfire because wildfire meant death. When early humans learned to control fire, they essentially gained the power to create one of the most feared natural phenomena on the planet, on demand, wherever they wanted. But this wasn't just about keeping a small campfire burning to scare away predators at night. Archaeological evidence shows that human groups were using fire in incredibly sophisticated ways for defense and territory control. At sites like Cavemen Cave in Israel, dating back nearly 400,000 years, we find evidence of controlled burning that goes far beyond simple campfires. These early humans were using fire to clear vegetation around their living sites, creating open areas where it would be difficult for predators to approach unseen. They were essentially creating defensive perimeters, using fire as their primary tool. But more importantly, they were using fire to modify entire landscapes. Controlled burning allowed them to influence animal migration patterns, create better hunting grounds, and eliminate hiding places for predators. In Australia, Aboriginal peoples continued these fire management practices right up until European contact, and the techniques they used were incredibly sophisticated. Different types of fires for different purposes, burned at different times of year to achieve specific ecological outcomes. This wasn't just setting things on fire randomly. This was precision ecosystem management using fire as a tool. Early humans could burn specific areas to encourage the growth of plants that attracted game animals, while simultaneously eliminating dense brush where predators might hide. They could create fire breaks to prevent natural wildfires from destroying their territories, and they could use smoke signals for long-distance communication across vast landscapes. Fire also revolutionized hunting. Archaeological sites across Europe and Asia show evidence of coordinated fire drives where human groups would use controlled fires to funnel animals into specific areas where they could be more easily killed. These weren't simple grass fires. They were carefully planned operations that required extensive coordination and intimate knowledge of animal behavior patterns. At sites like Torralba and Ambrona in Spain, dating to around 400,000 years ago, we find evidence of fire being used to hunt massive straight-tusked elephants, animals that stood 12 feet tall and weighed up to 15 tons. The only way early humans could have successfully hunted these creatures was through coordinated fire drives. That forced the elephants into swampy areas where they would become trapped and vulnerable. But fire provided another crucial advantage that is often overlooked. It extended the usable hours of each day. Before fire, early humans were essentially limited to daylight hours for most activities. Once the sun went down, they were vulnerable, nearly blind, and at a severe disadvantage compared to nocturnal predators with superior night vision. Fire changed all of that. With controlled fire, human groups could remain active well into the night. They could work on tools and equipment, plan hunting strategies, share knowledge, and maintain vigilance against predators. Most importantly, they could choose when to be active and when to rest, rather than being forced to follow the sun's schedule. This might not sound like a huge advantage, but think about what it meant in practical terms. While nocturnal predators like cave lions and saber-toothed cats were hunting in the darkness, human groups could maintain bright fires that not only protected them, but allowed them to see these predators coming from a considerable distance. They went from being vulnerable targets in the night to being the ones in control of visibility and lighting conditions. Fire also revolutionized food processing in ways that had profound implications for human survival. Cooking meat didn't just make it taste better, it made it safer and more nutritious. Cooked meat is easier to digest, which means humans could extract more calories and nutrients from their food. This was crucial during harsh winters or periods of food scarcity when every calorie mattered for survival. But more importantly, fire allowed humans to process and preserve food in ways that gave them significant advantages over other predators. They could smoke meat to preserve it for long periods, allowing them to store food for times when hunting was difficult or impossible. They could render fat for long-term storage, providing concentrated energy sources during harsh conditions. Fire also allowed humans to process plant foods that would otherwise be inedible or toxic. Many roots, tubers, and seeds require cooking to break down toxins or make nutrients available. By expanding their diet to include these fire-processed plant foods, humans reduced their dependence on hunting and created more diverse and reliable food sources. Perhaps most importantly, fire allowed humans to expand into environments that would otherwise have been completely uninhabitable. The spread of humans into northern latitudes during Ice Age conditions would have been impossible without the ability to create artificial warmth and light. Fire allowed human groups to survive in environments where the ambient temperature could drop to -40 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. But fire wasn't just about individual survival. It was about social cohesion and cultural development. The hearth became the center of human social life. Archaeological evidence shows that by 100,000 years ago, human living sites were organized around central fire areas where groups would gather to share food, share information, and engage in social bonding activities. This is where human language and culture really began to flourish. Sitting around fires in the evening, groups would share stories, teach skills to younger members, plan future activities, and develop the complex social bonds that made their cooperative survival strategies possible. Fire literally created the time and space for human civilization to develop. Recent research has even suggested that the light from fires may have played a role in human cognitive development. The flicker of firelight appears to trigger certain brainwave patterns that are associated with relaxation and creative thinking. Spending hours each evening in firelight may have contributed to the development of human imagination, storytelling abilities, and abstract thinking. But perhaps the most profound impact of fire mastery was psychological. For the first time in the history of life on Earth, there was a species that didn't have to fear the darkness. While every other animal was limited by natural cycles of light and dark, humans could create their own light wherever and whenever they needed it. This represented a fundamental shift in the relationship between humans and their environment. They were no longer just responding to environmental conditions. They were controlling and modifying those conditions to suit their needs. Fire was the first human technology that allowed them to overcome the limitations of their biology and create artificial environments that enhanced their survival capabilities. Archaeological evidence shows that by 50,000 years ago, human fire use had become incredibly sophisticated. They were creating different types of fires for different purposes: hot, fast-burning fires for working stone tools, slow, smoky fires for preserving meat, controlled burns for landscape management, and specialized fires for creating tools like heated spear points. They were also creating portable fire technologies that allowed them to carry fire with them as they moved across landscapes. Fire-making kits found at archaeological sites include specialized tinder, fire-starting tools, and fuel preparations that show incredible knowledge of fire chemistry and maintenance. By the time humans were spreading across the globe between 70,000 and 15,000 years ago, they weren't just using fire. They were masters of fire technology in ways that gave them overwhelming advantages over every other species they encountered. But mastery of fire was just one component of human survival technology. To truly understand how our ancestors conquered a world of monsters, we need to look at how they combined fire mastery with increasingly sophisticated weapons and hunting techniques. Chapter 4. Weapons of Survival. When you look at early human weapons in museums, it's easy to underestimate them. A wooden spear with a stone point doesn't look particularly impressive compared to the massive teeth and claws of a saber-toothed cat. But what you're re-looking at isn't just a stick with a sharp rock. You're re-looking at the end result of hundreds of thousands of years of technological evolution, representing a level of engineering sophistication that had never existed before in the natural world. Let me put this in perspective. The earliest stone tools we found date back nearly 3.3 million years, but those were simple choppers and scrapers made by our early ancestors. By 300,000 years ago, humans were creating composite tools with multiple components. By 50,000 years ago, they were manufacturing precision instruments that required dozens of individual manufacturing steps and represented accumulated knowledge passed down through generations. But early human weapons weren't just about the technology. They were about how that technology was applied through sophisticated understanding of physics, biology, and tactics. Let's start with the spear, because it represents one of the most important technological breakthroughs in human history. A spear isn't just a stick with a point. It is a force multiplier that extends human reach, concentrates force at a specific point, and allows humans to deliver lethal damage while maintaining safe distance from dangerous prey. But spear technology was incredibly sophisticated. Archaeological evidence shows that by 400,000 years ago, humans were creating spears from specific types of wood chosen for their flexibility, strength, and weight characteristics. They would select straight-grained hardwoods, season them properly to remove moisture and prevent cracking, and shape them using fire and stone tools to achieve optimal balance and aerodynamics. The spear points themselves represent some of the most advanced stoneworking technology ever developed. Creating an effective spear point requires intimate understanding of stone fracture mechanics, precise control of striking angles and force, and the ability to visualize the final product while working with raw materials. A master flint knapper could create a spear point with edges sharper than modern surgical steel, and do it with nothing but stone hammers and careful technique. But the real breakthrough came with the invention of the atlatl, or spear thrower. This device, which appeared in the archaeological record around 30,000 years ago, effectively increased the length of a human's throwing arm, allowing them to launch spears with much greater force and accuracy than would be possible using arm strength alone. An atlatl doesn't look like much. It is essentially a stick with a hook or socket at one end and a grip at the other. But the physics are remarkable. By extending the lever arm of the throwing motion, an atlatl can increase spear velocity by 60 to 100%, while also improving accuracy and range. A skilled user could launch a 6-foot spear with enough force to penetrate the hide of a mammoth from 50 yards away. Archaeological experiments have shown that atlatl-launched spears can achieve velocities of over 100 miles per hour and can penetrate several inches into ballistic gelatin, deep enough to reach vital organs on most large animals. For the first time in human history, humans had a weapon that could deliver fatal wounds to the largest, most dangerous animals on the planet from a safe distance. But individual weapons were just one part of the equation. What made human hunting technology truly revolutionary was how these weapons were integrated into sophisticated tactical systems. Archaeological evidence from sites like Jengeren in Germany, dating to around 300,000 years ago, shows that early humans were using coordinated spear attacks to hunt horses. But these weren't random encounters. The positioning of the spear fragments suggests carefully planned ambush where multiple hunters would attack simultaneously from different directions, ensuring that even if some spears missed or failed to cause immediately fatal wounds, the combined attack would be successful. By 30,000 years ago, human hunting tactics had evolved to include complex multi-stage operations that combined different weapons and techniques. They would use fire drives to funnel animals into specific areas, then deploy teams of spear throwers positioned at strategic locations to maximize their chances of successful kills while minimizing their exposure to danger. At mammoth hunting sites across Eastern Europe, we find evidence of truly remarkable tactical sophistication. These sites show that human groups were coordinating hunts involving 50 or more individuals, using a combination of pit traps, barriers, fire drives, and coordinated spear attacks to bring down animals that weighed 12,000 pounds or more. But perhaps the most impressive development was the creation of specialized weapons designed for specific types of prey. Archaeological sites show evidence of different spear designs, optimized for different hunting scenarios: lightweight, fast spears for hunting, fast-moving animals like deer and horses, heavy penetrating spears for hunting large, thick-skinned animals like mammoths and rhinoceros, and broad-bladed spears designed to cause maximum bleeding in wounded animals. This specialization represents incredibly sophisticated understanding of weapon design principles and animal anatomy. Early humans understood that different prey animals required different killing strategies. and they developed the weapons and tactics to implement those strategies effectively. But weapons technology wasn't just about hunting. It was also about defense. Archaeological evidence shows that human groups were creating specialized defensive weapons designed specifically for protection against large predators. Sites from this period contain evidence of long, heavy spears that appear to have been designed for thrusting rather than throwing. Defensive weapons that could be used to keep large predators at a safe distance. There is also evidence of communal defensive structures, arrangements of sharpened stakes and barriers that could provide protection for entire groups during predator attacks. But perhaps most importantly, early humans developed weapons that could be used effectively by coordinated groups. While a single human with a spear might not be able to kill a cave bear, 10 humans with spears working together could surround, wound, and eventually kill even the largest predators. This cooperative weapons use represented something entirely new in the natural world. Individual predators, no matter how large or powerful, were adapted to fight other individual animals. They had no evolutionary experience dealing with coordinated attacks from multiple opponents using artificial weapons that extended their reach and multiplied their striking power. The archaeological record shows clear evidence of this tactical revolution. Sites that show evidence of human-predator interactions increasingly show dead predators rather than dead humans. By 20,000 years ago, there's evidence that human groups were actively hunting large predators, not just defending against them. But weapons technology continued to evolve rapidly. By 15,000 years ago, humans had developed composite weapons that combined multiple materials and technologies to achieve performance levels that wouldn't be matched again until the development of modern firearms. The atlatl was refined and improved, with sophisticated designs that included finger loops for better grip, weights for optimal balance, and specialized hooks designed for different types of spears. Some atlatls found at archaeological sites show evidence of decoration and personalization, suggesting that they were valued possessions that individuals would use and maintain over many years. Spear design also became increasingly sophisticated. Composite spears with detachable points allowed hunters to recover and reuse the valuable spear shafts even if the points were lost or embedded in prey. Some spears included barbed points designed to remain in wounded animals, causing continued bleeding and making escape difficult. Perhaps most impressively, humans developed the bow and arrow, which appeared in different parts of the world between 70,000 and 10,000 years ago. The bow represented an even more sophisticated application of physics principles than the atlatl, using stored elastic energy to launch lightweight projectiles with remarkable accuracy and penetrating power. Early bows were incredibly sophisticated pieces of engineering. They required careful selection of woods with specific elastic properties, precise shaping to optimize energy storage and release, and strings made from specially processed animal sinews. The arrows were even more complex, requiring straight shafts, carefully balanced points, and fletching design to provide stable flight characteristics. A skilled archer could loose 6 or more arrows per minute, each one capable of penetrating several inches into large animals. For the first time, humans had a truly rapid-fire weapon that could deliver multiple lethal wounds from long range with remarkable accuracy. But perhaps the most important aspect of human weapons technology wasn't the individual tools. It was the knowledge systems that supported them. By 20,000 years ago, human groups had developed sophisticated training systems for weapons use, standardized manufacturing techniques that could be taught and replicated, and quality control methods that ensured weapons would perform reliably under stress. Archaeological evidence shows that weapons making had become a specialized skill, with master craftsmen who devoted significant portions of their time to creating and maintaining weapons for their groups. These specialists were developing techniques for heat-treating stone points to increase their durability, for creating composite adhesives to bind spear components together, and for testing and quality control methods that ensured weapons would function properly when lives depended on them. This represents something unprecedented in the natural world, a species that could continuously improve its physical capabilities through technology, passing those improvements down through generations and spreading them across populations. While a saber-toothed cat's fangs were fixed by evolution and couldn't be improved during its lifetime, human weapons were constantly evolving, becoming more effective with each generation. By the end of the Pleistocene, humans had developed weapons technology that made them the most effective predators on the planet. They could kill at range, they could kill cooperatively, they could kill animals much larger than themselves, and they could do it all while minimizing their own risk. For the first time in the history of life on Earth, there was a species whose artificial capabilities exceeded their natural ones. The weapons were just tools. What made early humans truly unstoppable was how they used those tools through hunting strategies that were more sophisticated than anything that had ever existed before. Chapter 5. The Art of the Hunt. If you want to understand how early humans went from being potential prey to becoming the apex predator of the Pleistocene, you need to understand that they didn't just hunt. They waged warfare against the animal kingdom using tactics so sophisticated that they wouldn't look out of place in a modern military operation. What I'm about to describe isn't speculation. It's based on archaeological evidence from dozens of sites across the globe, showing clear patterns of coordinated hunting activities that required levels of planning, communication, and execution that had never existed before in the natural world. Let's start with mammoth hunting, because it represents perhaps the most impressive example of early human tactical sophistication. Mammoths weren't just large animals. They were massive, intelligent, dangerous creatures that lived in family groups and had evolved sophisticated defensive behaviors over millions of years. A full-grown mammoth could weigh 12,000 pounds, stand 14 feet tall, and had tusks that could easily kill a human with a single swipe. Yet archaeological sites across Europe and Asia show clear evidence that human groups were regularly and successfully hunting these creatures, often taking multiple animals in single operations. The question is, how? The answer lies in sites like Predmosty in the Czech Republic, where archaeologists have found the remains of over 1,000 mammoths, along with evidence of the human activities that killed them. What they discovered was evidence of hunting operations that were planned and executed with military precision. These weren't opportunistic kills. The positioning of the mammoth remains, the types of injuries they sustained, and the distribution of human artifacts all point to carefully coordinated operations that were planned weeks or months in advance. Here's how it worked. First, human groups would spend extensive time observing mammoth herds, learning their migration patterns, their preferred feeding areas, their social structures, and their defensive behaviors. They would identify the routes mammoths used to travel between seasonal feeding grounds, noting bottlenecks and areas where the terrain could be used to human advantage. Then they would prepare the battlefield. At sites like Ambrona in Spain, we find evidence that human groups were modifying the landscape months before planned hunts. They would dig concealed pit traps along known migration routes, construct barriers to funnel animals into specific areas, and prepare stockpiles of weapons and tools at strategic locations. When the time came for the actual hunt, multiple human groups would coordinate their activities across vast areas. Some groups would position themselves at strategic bottlenecks where mammoths could be ambushed. Others would use fire drives to panic the herds and force them toward the ambush sites. Still others would be positioned as backup hunters to pursue any animals that escaped the initial attack. But here's what makes this truly remarkable. These operations required communication and coordination across distances of many miles, involving dozens or even hundreds of individuals, all working toward a common goal according to a predetermined plan. The level of organizational sophistication required for these hunts was comparable to modern military operations. Archaeological evidence shows that human groups were using sophisticated signaling systems, smoke signals, horn calls, and visual signals to coordinate their activities during these hunts. At some sites, we find evidence of elevated observation posts where scouts could monitor mammoth movements and relay information to hunting parties positioned miles away. The actual killing techniques were equally sophisticated. Rather than trying to bring down these massive animals through brute force, human hunters used precision targeting of vital areas, employing their detailed knowledge of mammoth anatomy to maximize the effectiveness of their attacks. Evidence from kill sites shows that hunters were targeting specific areas: the base of the skull, the area behind the shoulder where major blood vessels were located, and the lower legs where injuries would cripple the animal and prevent escape. These weren't random attacks. They were surgical strikes designed to disable and kill animals 10 times the size of the hunters. But mammoth hunting was just one example of human tactical sophistication. Archaeological evidence shows that early humans developed specialized hunting strategies for virtually every type of prey they encountered. For hunting horses and other fast-moving animals, they developed drive techniques that use natural terrain features to funnel herds into box canyons or other areas where escape was impossible. At sites like Saluter in France, archaeologists have found the remains of over 100,000 horses, all apparently killed during coordinated drive hunts over a period of several thousand years. For hunting cave bears and other large predators, they developed ambush techniques that use the animal's own territorial behaviors against them. Archaeological evidence suggests that human groups would deliberately intrude on predator territories to provoke defensive responses, then use coordinated attacks to kill the predators when they charged. Perhaps most impressively, early humans developed hunting techniques specifically designed for taking multiple animals from single herds. Rather than killing one animal and then having to start over, they developed methods for panicking entire herds into situations where many animals could be killed in a single operation. This type of surplus killing provided several crucial advantages. It allowed human groups to accumulate large amounts of meat and other resources in short periods of time, reducing the risks associated with frequent hunting expeditions. It also provided materials for trade with other groups and resources that could be preserved for use during times when hunting was difficult or impossible. But the tactical sophistication went beyond the hunts themselves. Archaeological evidence shows that human groups were developing complex post-hunt processing operations that maximized the value they could extract from their kills. At mammoth kill sites, we find evidence of systematic processing operations where every part of the animal was used for something. Meat was consumed fresh, smoked for preservation, or rendered for fat. Bones were used for tools, shelter construction, and fuel. Hide was processed for clothing, shelter, and containers. Even mammoth hair was collected and used for various purposes. These processing operations required their own specialized tools, techniques, and organizational systems. Archaeological sites show evidence of work areas specifically designed for different types of processing activities, with specialized tools for each task and clear evidence of task specialization among group members. But perhaps most importantly, early humans developed hunting strategies that were specifically designed to minimize risk to the hunters themselves. Unlike other predators that had to expose themselves to danger to make kills, human hunters used their intelligence and technology to create hunting methods that maximize their chances of success while minimizing their exposure to injury or death. This risk management approach was crucial for human survival. Individual predators could afford to take significant risks because they only had to worry about their own survival. But human groups were dependent on the survival of multiple individuals with specialized knowledge and skills. Losing experienced hunters to accidents or predator attacks could be catastrophic for entire groups. So human hunting strategies were designed with multiple backup plans and safety measures. Hunting parties would include extra hunters beyond what was strictly necessary for the kill, ensuring that the operation could continue even if some hunters were injured. They would establish escape routes and rally points in case hunts went wrong. They would use ranged weapons whenever possible to maintain safe distances from dangerous prey. Archaeological evidence also shows that human groups were developing sophisticated strategies for dealing with hunting injuries and casualties. Sites from this period contain evidence of advanced medical knowledge, including surgical techniques for treating wounds, methods for setting broken bones, and knowledge of medicinal plants that could be used to treat hunting-related injuries. This medical knowledge was itself a crucial survival technology. The ability to treat injuries and keep hunters functional extended the effective lifespans of group members and maintained a knowledge base that made sophisticated hunting possible. But the most remarkable aspect of early human hunting was how rapidly these techniques evolved and spread. Archaeological evidence shows that hunting innovations developed in one region would appear in sites hundreds of thousands of miles away within relatively short periods of time. This suggests that human groups were not only developing sophisticated hunting techniques, but were also actively sharing and improving those techniques through extensive communication networks. Successful hunting strategies were being refined, standardized, and transmitted across human populations, creating a continuously evolving body of tactical knowledge that grew more effective with each generation. By 15,000 years ago, human hunting techniques had become so sophisticated and effective that they represented a completely new type of predation. For the first time in the history of life on Earth, there was a predator that could systematically hunt any animal it chose, regardless of that animal's size, speed, strength, or defensive capabilities. This wasn't just about being able to kill individual animals. Human hunting strategies were capable of targeting entire populations, selectively removing the strongest and healthiest individuals from breeding populations, and ultimately driving species to extinction across vast geographical areas. The archaeological record shows clear evidence of this systematic predation. As human populations spread across the globe, large-bodied animal species began disappearing from the fossil record in wave patterns that closely follow human migration routes. This wasn't coincidence. It was the result of human hunting pressure that was unlike anything these animal populations had ever faced. But hunting success was just one component of human survival strategy. To truly understand how our ancestors conquered a world of monsters, we need to look at how they organized their societies to maximize their survival advantages. Chapter 6. Strength in Numbers. Here, as something that will completely change how you think about early humans. They weren't just clever individuals with good tools and hunting techniques. They were members of the most sophisticated social organizations that had ever existed in the natural world. Societies that were specifically designed to maximize survival in hostile environments. When we look at other social animals, we see impressive cooperation, but it's usually limited in scope and scale. Wolf packs work together to hunt, but they rarely exceed 8 to 10 individuals. Chimpanzee groups can number up to 150 individuals, but their cooperation is mostly limited to territorial defense and basic resource sharing. Even the most advanced animal societies pale in comparison to what early humans achieved. Archaeological evidence shows that by 50,000 years ago, human societies had developed organizational structures that allowed them to coordinate activities across hundreds of individuals and vast geographical areas. These weren't just larger groups. They were qualitatively different types of organizations based on principles that had never existed before in the natural world. Let's start with specialization. In most animal societies, every individual performs essentially the same functions. Every wolf in a pack is a hunter. Every bee in a hive has a specific role, but those roles are determined by biology, not by choice or ability. Early human societies developed something completely different. voluntary specialization based on individual skills and aptitudes. Archaeological sites show clear evidence of individuals who devoted most of their time to specific activities: tool making, hunting, hide processing, food preparation, childcare, and other specialized functions. This specialization wasn't just about efficiency. It was about survival. A master toolmaker could create better weapons and equipment than someone who only made tools occasionally. A specialized tracker could read signs and predict animal behavior better than someone who tracked only when necessary. A dedicated healer could accumulate knowledge about treating injuries and illnesses that could save lives during critical situations. But specialization created a problem. How do you ensure that specialists in one area can access the products and services of specialists in other areas? The answer was the development of complex exchange systems that allowed individuals and groups to trade specialized goods and services across vast networks. Archaeological evidence shows that by 40,000 years ago, human groups were engaged in trade networks that spanned continents. Stone tools found at sites in Western Europe were made from materials that came from quarries hundreds of miles away. Shell ornaments found in inland sites came from coastal areas that were weeks of travel away. Obsidian tools found in archaeological sites often come from volcanic sources that are hundreds or even thousands of miles from where they were used. This wasn't just occasional long-distance trade. This was systematic exchange that allowed human groups to access resources and technologies that weren't available in their local environments. A group living in an area with poor stone for tool making could trade meat or hides for high-quality stone tools made by specialists who live near good stone sources. But more importantly, these trade networks allowed for the rapid spread of innovations and survival technologies. When one group developed a better spear design or a new hunting technique, that information could spread across vast areas through the trade networks, allowing human populations to continuously improve their survival capabilities. Archaeological evidence also shows that early human societies developed sophisticated systems for sharing risk across groups. Rather than each group having to survive independently, human societies developed mutual assistance networks that provided support during times of crisis. If one group's territory was devastated by environmental disaster or predator pressure, other groups would provide food, shelter, and assistance until the affected group could recover. If a group lost too many hunters to accidents or predator attacks, other groups would provide temporary hunting assistance or even permanent integration of surviving members. This risk sharing was crucial for human survival because it allowed groups to take the kind of calculated risks that were necessary for successful hunting and territorial expansion. Knowing that failure wouldn't necessarily mean death for the entire group, human societies could attempt more ambitious and dangerous survival strategies. But perhaps most importantly, early human societies developed systems for preserving and transmitting knowledge across generations that were far more sophisticated than anything that had existed before in the natural world. Animal societies can pass on some learned behaviors through observation and imitation, but this transmission is usually limited and fragile. If the individuals who know a particular behavior die, that knowledge is often lost forever. Human societies developed formal systems for knowledge transmission that ensured crucial survival information would be preserved and passed down through generations. Archaeological evidence shows that by 30,000 years ago, human groups were conducting systematic training programs for young people, teaching them not just basic survival skills, but the accumulated knowledge and experience of their ancestors. These educational systems covered everything from tool-making and hunting techniques to detailed knowledge about local environments, animal behavior patterns, plant identification, weather prediction, and medical treatments. Young people weren't just learning through casual observation. They were receiving formal instruction from specialists who had devoted their lives to mastering specific knowledge areas. But the most remarkable aspect of early human social organization was how it facilitated rapid adaptation to new environments and challenges. When human groups encountered new predators, new prey animals, or new environmental conditions, they could rapidly develop and implement survival strategies by combining the knowledge and skills of multiple specialists. Archaeological evidence from human expansion into new continents shows this adaptive capacity clearly. When humans first arrived in Australia around 50,000 years ago, they encountered a completely different ecosystem with unique predators and prey species. Within a few thousand years, they had developed specialized hunting techniques for giant kangaroos, massive monitor lizards, and other megafauna that existed nowhere else on Earth. Similarly, when humans reached the Geos, Americas around 15,000 years ago, they quickly developed specialized techniques for hunting. American megafauna, giant ground sloths, American lions, short-faced bears, and other species that were unlike anything they had encountered in previous continents. This rapid adaptation was only possible because of the sophisticated social systems that allowed human groups to quickly share information, coordinate experiments with new techniques, and rapidly disseminate successful innovations across populations. But early human societies also developed something that was completely unprecedented in the natural world: systems for managing conflict and competition within groups. Most animal societies are held together by dominance hierarchies based on physical strength or aggression. The strongest individuals get the best resources, and weaker individuals have to accept whatever is left. Early human societies developed more sophisticated approaches to internal organization that maximized the survival advantages of cooperation while minimizing the destructive effects of internal competition. Archaeological evidence suggests that leadership roles were often based on knowledge and skill rather than just physical dominance, and that resources were distributed according to principles that maintained group cohesion and effectiveness. This doesn't mean early human societies were peaceful or egalitarian. Archaeological evidence shows plenty of evidence of conflict and competition. But they developed systems for managing that conflict in ways that maintained the cooperative relationships that were essential for survival. Perhaps most importantly, early human societies developed cultural institutions that reinforced the social bonds and shared values that made their survival strategies possible. Archaeological sites from this period show evidence of art, music, storytelling, and ritual activities that served to strengthen group identity and maintain the social cohesion that made cooperation possible. Cave paintings found at sites like Lascaux and Altamira weren't just art for art's sake. They were cultural technologies that preserved and transmitted important information about animal behavior, hunting techniques, and environmental knowledge. The rituals and ceremonies evidenced at archaeological sites weren't just entertainment. They were social technologies that reinforced the bonds and shared values that made human cooperation possible. By 20,000 years ago, human societies had become so sophisticated and effective that they represented something entirely new in the history of life on Earth. For the first time, there was a species that could coordinate activities across vast populations, rapidly adapt to new challenges, preserve and transmit knowledge across generations, and maintain cooperative relationships that enhanced rather than diminished individual survival prospects. This social revolution was just as important as the technological innovations in tools and weapons. In fact, the technological innovations were only possible because of the social systems that supported them. Without the specialization, knowledge transmission, and cooperative networks that characterized early human societies, the weapons and hunting techniques would never have developed to the level of sophistication that made humans the dominant predator on the planet. But even with all these advantages, fire, weapons, hunting techniques, and sophisticated social organization, early humans still faced daily survival challenges that tested every aspect of their adaptive capabilities. To truly understand how they survived in a world of monsters, we need to look at what daily life was actually like for our ancestors. Chapter 7. A Day in the Life. Let me take you through a typical day in the life of an early human group living 25,000 years ago during the height of the last ice age. This isn't fantasy or speculation. This is based on archaeological evidence from sites across Europe and Asia that give us remarkably detailed insights into how our ancestors actually lived. It's late autumn, and your group of about 35 people is camped in a river valley in what is now southern France. The landscape around you is a mix of grassland and sparse woodland, with snow-capped mountains visible in the distance. The temperature at night drops below freezing, and even during the day, it rarely gets much above 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Your shelter isn't a cave. Despite what popular culture suggests, most early humans didn't live in caves. Instead, you're living in sophisticated constructed shelters made from mammoth bones, covered with carefully prepared hides. These structures are surprisingly spacious and well-insulated, designed by people who understood the principles of thermal efficiency and weather resistance. You wake before dawn, not because you want to, but because someone needs to tend the fire. In early human groups, the fire never went out, ever. Losing your fire during winter could mean death for the entire group, so there's always someone awake to maintain it. Archaeological evidence shows that some hearths were kept burning continuously for decades. As the designated fire tender for the night, you carefully add fuel to maintain the optimal temperature. This isn't just throwing wood on flames, it's precise fire management. You're reusing different types of fuel for different purposes. Fast-burning dry grasses to quickly raise the temperature, slow-burning hardwood to maintain steady heat through the night, and specific types of wood that produce minimal smoke so you don't alert predators to your location. As dawn approaches, other members of your group begin to wake. The first priority is always security assessment. Two experienced trackers immediately begin checking the perimeter around your camp for signs of predator activity during the night. They're looking for tracks, scent markings, and other signs that might indicate dangerous animals in the area. What they find this morning is concerning. Fresh cave lion tracks about 200 meters from your camp, made sometime after midnight. The tracks indicate a large male, probably hunting alone, who came close enough to smell your group but didn't approach the fire. This information immediately changes the day's plans. While the trackers are assessing security, others are beginning food preparation. Breakfast isn't just eating whatever is available. It has carefully planned nutrition designed to provide the energy and nutrients needed for the day's activities. Preserved meat from a recent mammoth kill is combined with nuts and dried berries that were collected and stored during the summer. Fat rendered from the mammoth provides concentrated calories, while herbal teas made from specific plants provide important vitamins. But food preparation is also weapons maintenance time. While meat is cooking, hunters are checking their spears, replacing damaged points, adjusting atlatls, and preparing backup equipment. In a world where equipment failure can mean death, weapons maintenance is a daily ritual that's taken very seriously. The presence of cave lion tracks means that today's planned hunting expedition needs to be modified. The original plan was to hunt deer in a valley about 5 miles away, but that would require the hunters to travel through territory that the cave lion might be using. Instead, the group decides to hunt closer to camp, where they can support each other if the predator appears. This kind of real-time tactical adjustment was a constant feature of early human life. Plans were always provisional, dependent on current conditions and new information. Flexibility and rapid adaptation weren't just useful skills. They were essential survival traits. The hunting party that leaves camp this morning consists of 8 experienced hunters, all carrying multiple spears and atlatls. But they're not just carrying weapons. They're carrying a sophisticated array of specialized equipment. Fire-starting kits in case they need to create emergency signals or defensive fires. Emergency food supplies in case they get separated from the main group. Medicinal plants for treating potential injuries. stone knapping tools for field repairs to weapons. The hunters who stay behind aren't idle. Cave lion tracks this close to camp mean that defensive preparations are necessary. They begin improving the barriers around the camp perimeter, sharpening stakes and positioning backup spears at strategic locations. If the cave lion decides to attack the camp, they'll be ready. Meanwhile, other group members are engaged in the dozens of daily tasks necessary for survival. Hides are being processed for clothing and shelter repair, a complex multi-day process that requires specific tools, techniques, and timing. Tools are being manufactured and repaired using stone knapping techniques that take years to master. Plant foods are being processed to remove toxins and increase nutritional value. But perhaps most importantly, knowledge is being transmitted. Older group members are teaching younger ones the accumulated wisdom of generations: how to read weather signs, how to identify edible and medicinal plants, how to predict animal behavior, how to make tools, how to navigate using natural landmarks. This education isn't casual, it's systematic and comprehensive. Young people are learning not just individual skills, but the integrated knowledge systems that make human survival possible. They're learning how different pieces of information connect together, how weather patterns affect animal behavior, how seasonal changes influence plant availability, how terrain features can be used for hunting and defense. Around midday, the hunting party returns with a young deer. Not a huge kill, but enough to provide fresh meat for the group for a couple of days. But more importantly, they return with information. They've found evidence of a mammoth herd moving through the area about 10 miles away. This represents a potential opportunity for a major hunt that could provide resources for weeks. The afternoon is spent in planning sessions for this potential mammoth hunt. This isn't casual discussion. It's detailed tactical planning that involves the entire group. Scouts will need to be sent to track the herd and determine its movement patterns. Other groups in the area will need to be contacted to coordinate a joint hunting effort. Specialized equipment will need to be prepared. Weather conditions will need to be monitored. But the presence of the cave lion still influences everything. Scouts traveling to observe the mammoth herd will need to be prepared for predator encounters. Communication with other groups will need to account for the fact that travel is more dangerous than usual. The mammoth hunt itself will need to include provisions for predator defense. As evening approaches, the group gathers around the central fire for the most important time of day, the sharing of information and social bonding that maintains group cohesion. Today's events are discussed and analyzed. The cave lion situation is assessed. Is this a temporary presence or a sign of increased predator pressure in the area? The mammoth hunt opportunity is evaluated. Is it worth the risks involved? But this evening gathering isn't just about practical planning. Stories are told that preserve cultural knowledge and reinforce group values. Songs are sung that help maintain social bonds. Children play games that teach them skills they'll need as adults. Older members of the group share their memories of similar situations and how they were handled. As night falls, security arrangements are established for the night ahead. Guards are assigned to watch different approaches to the camp. Fire maintenance schedules are organized. Emergency response plans are reviewed. Everyone knows what to do if the cave lion or any other predator decides to attack during the night. Before sleep, final preparations are made for tomorrow. Weather is assessed based on wind patterns, cloud formations, and other natural signs. Equipment is checked and positioned for quick access. Plans are reviewed and contingencies discussed. This is what daily life was actually like for early humans: constant vigilance, careful planning, sophisticated coordination, and detailed knowledge management. Every day involved dozens of decisions that could affect the survival of the entire group. Every activity was integrated into a comprehensive survival strategy that had been refined over thousands of generations. What's remarkable about this lifestyle isn't just that our ancestors survived it. It's that they thrived in it. Archaeological evidence shows that despite the constant dangers and challenges, early human groups maintained complex cultural traditions, developed sophisticated technologies, and continuously expanded into new territories. They weren't just surviving from day to day. They were building the foundation for human civilization. The social cooperation, technological innovation, and adaptive flexibility that allowed them to survive in a world of monsters were the same qualities that would eventually allow humans to dominate the entire planet. But to understand the full scope of human achievement during this period, we need to look at what happened when early humans encountered the ultimate survival challenge, expanding into completely new environments where everything they thought they knew about survival had to be learned all over again. Chapter 8. The Great Expansion. Between 70,000 and 15,000 years ago, early humans accomplished something that no other large animal had ever done in the history of life on Earth. They spread from a single continent to every habitable landmass on the planet. But this wasn't just a matter of wandering around until they found new places to live. This was a series of deliberate expansions into environments that were more hostile and dangerous than anything humans had ever encountered before. To understand the magnitude of this achievement, you need to realize that each new continent presented completely different survival challenges. Different predators with different hunting strategies. Different prey animals with different behaviors. Different climates with different seasonal patterns. Different plants, different diseases, different everything. And in each case, humans didn't just survive in these new environments. They rapidly became the dominant predator and fundamentally altered the ecosystems they entered. The speed and completeness of this global expansion represents one of the most remarkable episodes in the history of life on Earth. Let's start with the expansion out of Africa, which probably began around 70,000 years ago. The humans who made this journey were already sophisticated survivors who had spent hundreds of thousands of years adapting to African environments. But when they entered the Middle East and began moving into Asia and Europe, they encountered completely new challenges. The climate was colder and more seasonal than anything they had experienced. The animals were different. Cave bears instead of African bears. Cave lions instead of African lions. Woolly mammoths instead of African elephants. The plants were different. The terrain was different. Even the seasonal patterns of daylight and darkness were different. Yet archaeological evidence shows that within just a few thousand years, human populations had established themselves across vast areas of Asia and Europe. Sites like Kostenki in Russia, dating to around 45,000 years ago, show sophisticated settlements with advanced tool technologies and evidence of successful adaptation to harsh northern climates. But the real test came when humans reached Australia around 50,000 years ago. To get to Australia, they had to cross at least 90 kilometers of open ocean, something that required sophisticated boat-building technology and navigation skills. This wasn't accidental drift. It was deliberate exploration using technologies that we have no archaeological evidence for, but which must have existed. The Australia that early humans encountered was populated by some of the most bizarre and dangerous animals that ever existed. There was Megalania, a monitor lizard that was over 20 feet long and weighed up to 1,320 pounds. There was Thylacoleo, a marsupial lion with retractable claws and the strongest bite force relative to body size of any mammal that ever lived. There were giant flightless birds, massive wombats the size of cars, and crocodiles that made modern saltwater crocodiles look small. Yet within a few thousand years of human arrival, most of these megafaunal species were extinct. Archaeological evidence shows that humans rapidly developed specialized hunting techniques for Australian megafauna, using fire drives and coordinated attacks to bring down animals that had never faced predators like humans before. The expansion into Europe presented different challenges. By 40,000 years ago, humans entering Europe encountered not only dangerous megafauna, but also Neanderthals, another human species that had been living in Europe for hundreds of thousands of years and was perfectly adapted to European conditions. Neanderthals were physically stronger than modern humans, had larger brains, used sophisticated tools, and had intimate knowledge of European environments. They were successful hunters who had survived multiple ice ages and had established territories across much of Europe and Western Asia. Yet within about 10,000 years of modern human arrival in Europe, Neanderthals were extinct. Archaeological evidence suggests that modern humans outcompeted Neanderthals through superior social organization, more advanced technology, and greater adaptability to changing conditions. But perhaps the most impressive expansion was into the Americas, which occurred around 15,000 years ago. To reach the Americas, humans had to cross the Bering Land Bridge during Ice Age conditions, then navigate through ice-free corridors or along coastal routes to reach the southern parts of the continents. The Americas presented the most diverse and dangerous collection of megafauna that humans had ever encountered. In North America, there were American lions that were larger than any modern big cat, short-faced bears that could outrun horses, saber-toothed cats with 7-inch fangs, dire wolves that hunted in massive packs, and giant ground sloths that were larger than modern elephants. South America was even more extreme. There were terror birds, flightless predatory birds that stood 10 feet tall and had skulls the size of horses. There were giant ground sloths that weighed up to 8,000 pounds. There were massive armadillos the size of cars and crocodiles that were 40 feet long. Yet archaeological evidence shows that humans spread through both North and South America with remarkable speed, reaching the southern tip of South America within just a few thousand years of first entering the continent. And as they spread, the megafauna disappeared. This pattern is so consistent across all continents that it can't be coincidental. In every case, the arrival of humans is followed within a few thousand years by the extinction of most large-bodied animal species. This suggests that humans weren't just surviving alongside these animals, they were systematically outcompeting them. But what's really remarkable about this global expansion is the speed at which humans adapted their survival strategies to completely new environments. The archaeological record shows that within a few generations of arriving in a new area, human groups were developing specialized technologies and techniques specifically adapted to local conditions. In the Arctic, they developed sophisticated cold weather technologies, including specialized clothing, ice age shelters, and hunting techniques adapted to Arctic animals. In tropical environments, they developed technologies for dealing with different types of predators, diseases, and food sources. In maritime environments, they developed advanced boat building and navigation technologies. This rapid adaptation was only possible because of the sophisticated knowledge-sharing systems that early human societies had developed. When a group discovered a new survival technique or environmental adaptation, that information could be rapidly transmitted to other groups through the trade and communication networks that connected human populations across vast distances. Archaeological evidence shows that technological innovations developed in one part of the world would appear in sites thousands of miles away within relatively short periods of time. This suggests that human societies were not just expanding geographically, they were maintaining communication and knowledge sharing networks that allowed successful adaptations to spread rapidly across populations. But the global expansion also required something else that was unprecedented in the natural world: the ability to maintain cultural continuity while adapting to radically different environments. Human groups expanding into new continents had to develop new survival techniques while preserving the social cooperation and knowledge transmission systems that made their survival possible. This balancing act between adaptation and continuity was crucial for human success. Groups that adapted too completely to local conditions might lose the social and technological innovations that gave them advantages over other species. Groups that failed to adapt sufficiently would be outcompeted by locally adapted species or environmental challenges. Archaeological evidence suggests that early human societies developed sophisticated systems for maintaining this balance. They preserved core cultural and technological elements that were essential for human survival while rapidly adapting specific techniques and technologies to local conditions. By 12,000 years ago, this global expansion was essentially complete. Humans had established successful populations on every continent except Antarctica, had adapted to virtually every type of environment on Earth, and had become the dominant predator in every ecosystem they entered. This achievement is even more remarkable when you consider the timescale involved. The entire global expansion took place over a period of less than 60,000 years, a blink of an eye in evolutionary terms. Yet during this brief period, humans went from being a single species confined to Africa to becoming the most successful and widespread large animal on the planet. But the success of this expansion came at a cost. As humans spread across the globe, they left behind them a trail of extinction that fundamentally altered the ecosystems of every continent they entered. To understand the full scope of human achievement during the Pleistocene, we need to look at what happened to the monsters that early humans had learned to survive alongside. Chapter 9. The End of the Giants. By 10,000 years ago, the world had changed dramatically. The massive cave bears that had dominated European landscapes for millions of years were gone. The saber-toothed cats that had been apex predators across multiple continents were extinct. The giant short-faced bears, the dire wolves, the cave lions, the woolly mammoths, all gone. In fact, roughly 75% of all large-bodied animal species had disappeared from the planet. This wasn't a gradual decline over millions of years. This was rapid, systematic extinction that occurred over just a few thousand years, and it followed a very specific pattern. Wherever humans went, the megafauna disappeared. Some scientists call this the Quaternary extinction event or the late Pleistocene extinction. But I think there's a more accurate name for it: the human revolution. Because what happened wasn't just environmental change or climate shifts. It was the emergence of a completely new type of predator that fundamentally altered the rules of survival on Earth. Let's look at the evidence. In Australia, humans arrived around 50,000 years ago. Within 5,000 years, 85% of all large animal species were extinct. These included Megalania, the giant monitor lizard, Thylacoleo, the marsupial lion, Diprotodon, a giant wombat the size of a hippopotamus, and dozens of other species that had successfully survived multiple climate changes over millions of years. In North America, humans arrived around 15,000 years ago. By 10,000 years ago, 80% of large mammal species were gone. The American lion, the saber-toothed cat, the short-faced bear, the dire wolf, the giant ground sloth, the American cheetah, all extinct. These weren't animals that were already struggling to survive. Archaeological evidence shows that many of these species were thriving right up until they suddenly disappeared from the fossil record. In South America, the pattern was even more dramatic. Terror birds that had been the dominant predators for millions of years vanished. Giant ground sloths that had successfully adapted to multiple environmental changes went extinct. Massive armadillos, giant beavers, cave bears, gone. The timing is too precise to be coincidental. In every case, the extinctions occur within a few thousand years of human arrival, and they follow human migration routes with remarkable consistency. As humans spread across each continent, a wave of extinction followed behind them. Now, some scientists argue that climate change at the end of the Ice Age was responsible for these extinctions. And it's true that the climate was changing during this period. But here is the problem with the climate explanation. These animals had survived multiple ice ages and climate changes over millions of years. Why would this particular climate change be different? Moreover, the extinction pattern doesn't match what we would expect from climate change. If warming temperatures were the cause, we would expect to see gradual range shifts as animals move to more suitable habitats. Instead, we see sudden, complete disappearance of entire species across their entire ranges. The evidence for human involvement is overwhelming. At archaeological sites across the globe, we find clear evidence of humans hunting megafaunal species. Kill sites show human tools associated with the remains of extinct animals. Cave paintings depict humans hunting species that are now extinct. The archaeological record shows a clear pattern of human predation on exactly the species that went extinct. But this wasn't just hunting for survival. Archaeological evidence suggests that human hunting pressure was so intense that it was unsustainable for the prey populations. Sites like Murray Springs in Arizona show evidence of mammoth kills where humans took only choice parts of the animals, leaving most of the carcass to rot. This suggests surplus killing, hunting beyond what was necessary for immediate survival. Why would humans engage in this kind of seemingly wasteful hunting? The answer lies in the nature of human social organization. Unlike other predators that hunt primarily for immediate consumption, humans were hunting for trade, for status, for future security, and for materials that could be processed into tools and other goods. A single mammoth could provide not just meat, but materials for tools, shelter, clothing, and trade goods that could support a human group for months. The tusks alone were valuable trade items that could be exchanged for other resources. Under these circumstances, it made economic sense for human groups to kill as many mammoths as they could find, even if they couldn't immediately use all the resources. But the extinction of the megafauna wasn't just about hunting pressure. It was also about ecosystem disruption. When humans eliminated large herbivores like mammoths and giant ground sloths, they fundamentally altered plant communities and habitat structures. When they eliminated large predators like saber-toothed cats and cave lions, they disrupted predator-prey relationships that had been stable for millions of years. Archaeological evidence shows that humans were also using fire to modify landscapes on a massive scale. By burning large areas to create better hunting grounds or to eliminate predator habitat, they were changing entire ecosystems in ways that made them unsuitable for many native species. The result was a cascade of ecological changes that went far beyond the direct effects of human hunting. Species that weren't directly hunted by humans found their habitats altered, their food sources eliminated, or their ecological relationships disrupted. The entire structure of Pleistocene ecosystems collapsed as humans removed key species and modified landscapes. But perhaps most importantly, the megafaunal species that went extinct had no evolutionary experience with the type of predation that humans represented. They had evolved defensive strategies against individual predators or small groups of predators using natural weapons. They had no defenses against coordinated attacks by large groups of humans using artificial weapons and sophisticated tactics. Mammoths had developed effective defenses against cave lions and other natural predators. But they had no defenses against coordinated fire drives that forced them into traps where dozens of humans could attack them simultaneously with spears and atlatls. Their size and strength, which had protected them against natural predators for millions of years, were useless against human hunting techniques. Saber-toothed cats were perfectly adapted for ambush hunting of large prey, but they were not adapted for defending against coordinated attacks by human hunting parties who could track them to their dens and kill them with ranged weapons. Their powerful hunting abilities meant nothing when they became the hunted. The speed of these extinctions also suggests that many species had no time to adapt to human predation pressure. Evolution requires multiple generations for new traits to spread through populations. But human hunting techniques were so effective, and human populations were expanding so rapidly, that most megafaunal species were driven to extinction before they could evolve any effective responses. By 10,000 years ago, The transformation was complete. The world's ecosystems had been fundamentally restructured around human dominance. The age of the megafauna was over, and the age of human dominance had begun. But this transformation wasn't just about eliminating competition. It was about humans becoming something that had never existed before in the history of life on Earth. A species that could systematically control and modify entire ecosystems according to their needs and preferences. The humans who survived the Pleistocene weren't just successful hunters and gatherers. They were ecosystem engineers who had learned to shape the natural world to support their survival and expansion. They had developed the tools, techniques, and social organizations necessary to become the dominant force in every environment they entered. The extinction of the megafauna marked the end of one chapter in human history and the beginning of another. With their major competitors eliminated, humans could begin the process of actively managing ecosystems through agriculture, domestication, and landscape modification that would eventually lead to modern civilization. But the survival strategies that allowed early humans to conquer a world of monsters didn't disappear. They became the foundation for everything that followed, the basis for human civilization itself. Chapter 10: Legacy of the SURVIs. Here, as something that will completely change how you think about modern life. Almost everything that makes human civilization possible today can be traced back directly to the survival strategies that our ancestors developed to survive in a world of monsters. The technologies, social systems, and ways of thinking that allowed early humans to outcompete saber-toothed cats and cave bears are the same. Fundamental principles that allowed us to build cities, develop agriculture, create global trade networks, and eventually reach the moon. Let's start with technology. The tool-making traditions that began with simple stone choppers 3 million years ago evolved into the sophisticated composite weapons that made humans the dominant predator of the Pleistocene. But the principles underlying that technological development, systematic experimentation, incremental improvement, knowledge preservation, and specialization, are exactly the same principles that drive modern technological innovation. When early humans developed the atlatl, they weren't just creating a better hunting weapon. They were demonstrating the principle that human capabilities could be extended and amplified through artificial tools. This is the same principle that underlies every human technology, from the wheel to the computer to the space shuttle. The specialization that allowed some early humans to become master tool makers, while others focused on hunting or tracking, evolved into the complex division of labor that makes modern society possible. Today's economy, with its millions of specialized occupations and professions, is a direct descendant of the survival specialization that first appeared in Pleistocene human societies. The trade networks that allowed early humans to exchange high-quality stone tools across continents evolved into the global trade systems that connect every part of the modern world. The same principles that allowed early human groups to share survival innovations across vast distances now allow modern societies to share technologies, resources, and knowledge on a global scale. But perhaps most importantly, the social cooperation that was essential for human survival in hostile environments became the foundation for all human civilization. The ability to coordinate activities across large groups, to share knowledge and resources, to work together toward common goals. These aren't modern innovations. These are ancient survival strategies that have been refined and expanded over tens of thousands of years. The leadership structures that allowed early human hunting parties to coordinate complex operations evolved into the organizational systems that make modern institutions possible. The communication systems that allowed early humans to share survival information across groups evolved into the languages, writing systems, and information technologies that connect modern societies. Even our most apt modern capabilities can be traced back to Pleistocene survival strategies. The pattern recognition skills that allowed early humans to track animals and predict weather patterns are the same cognitive abilities that make modern science possible. The planning and coordination abilities that made mammoth hunting successful are the same abilities that allow modern societies to organize complex projects like building cities or exploring space. But the legacy of our Pleistocene ancestors goes deeper than just technologies and social systems. It extends to the fundamental ways that humans think about problems and challenges. The experimental mindset that allowed early humans to develop new hunting techniques in response to new prey animals is the same mindset that drives modern scientific research. The risk assessment abilities that helped early humans survive in dangerous environments are the same abilities that allow modern societies to manage complex technological and environmental challenges. The adaptability that allowed early humans to rapidly adjust their survival strategies in response to changing conditions is the same adaptability that allows modern societies to respond to economic, technological, and environmental changes. Even our basic approach to survival challenges remains fundamentally unchanged from our Pleistocene ancestors. When modern humans face new problems, we respond with the same basic strategy: analyze the challenge, develop tools and techniques to address it, share successful solutions with others, and continuously improve our approaches based on experience. This can be seen clearly in how modern societies have responded to challenges like disease, natural disasters, and resource scarcity. The development of modern medicine, emergency response systems, and resource management technologies all follow the same basic principles that early humans used to survive in hostile environments. To really understand how profound this continuity is, let's look at what happened when the Ice Age ended and humans transitioned from hunting and gathering to agriculture. This transition, which began around 12,000 years ago, is often portrayed as a complete break from the past, the beginning of civilization as we know it. But when you examine the archaeological evidence, the agricultural revolution looks less like a complete departure from human tradition and more like a sophisticated application of survival strategies that have been developing for tens of thousands of years. Consider the fundamental challenge that early farmers faced: how to reliably produce large quantities of food in a single location, year after year, without depleting the resources that made that production possible. This was essentially a scaled-up version of the resource management challenges that Pleistocene hunter-gatherers had been solving for millennia. Pleistocene humans had developed sophisticated understanding of natural cycles, plant ecology, and animal behavior through their survival activities. They knew which plants produced the most nutritious seeds, which animals were most suitable for sustained hunting, and how to manage natural resources to ensure long-term availability. The transition to agriculture didn't require them to abandon this knowledge. It required them to apply it in new ways. Instead of following wild grain stands and animal herds across vast territories, they began concentrating those resources in specific locations where they could be more intensively managed. Archaeological evidence shows that the earliest agricultural communities weren't random experiments by desperate hunter-gatherers. They were carefully planned applications of sophisticated ecological knowledge that had been accumulating for thousands of years. Early farmers chose their crops based on detailed understanding of plant genetics and nutrition. They selected their farming locations based on comprehensive knowledge of soil conditions, water availability, and climate patterns. Most importantly, they organized their agricultural communities using the same social cooperation and specialization strategies that had made Pleistocene hunting and gathering successful. Early farming villages show clear evidence of task specialization, resource sharing, and coordinated planning that mirror the organizational structures of successful hunter-gatherer societies. The tools and techniques used in early agriculture were also direct descendants of Pleistocene survival technologies. Digging sticks used for harvesting roots and tubers were adapted for soil preparation. Grinding stones used for processing wild seeds were improved for processing domesticated grains. Fire management techniques used for landscape modification were adapted for field clearing and crop management. Even the animals that were first domesticated, dogs, sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs, were selected based on knowledge that hunter-gatherers had accumulated through thousands of years of observation and interaction. Early farmers knew which animals were most suitable for domestication because their hunter-gatherer ancestors had been studying animal behavior and social structures for millennia. The development of the first cities, beginning around 6,000 years ago, followed similar patterns. Cities weren't completely new inventions. They were applications of human social organization strategies that had been developing since the Pleistocene. The earliest cities, like Cataluyuk in Turkey and Jericho in Palestine, show organizational structures that clearly descend from hunter-gatherer social systems. They have evidence of specialized craft production, long-distance trade networks, collective decision-making systems, and resource-sharing arrangements that are essentially scaled-up versions of the social technologies that made Pleistocene survival possible. The planning and coordination abilities that allowed early humans to organize mammoth hunts involving hundreds of participants were the same abilities that made it possible to coordinate the construction and maintenance of cities involving thousands of residents. The communication systems that allowed hunter-gatherer groups to share survival information across continents were the same systems that allowed early cities to maintain trade and diplomatic relationships with distant communities. Even the basic layout of early cities reflects principles that can be traced back to Pleistocene survival strategies. The central location of communal areas, the organization of specialized production areas, the positioning of defensive structures, and the management of resource storage and distribution all follow patterns that first appeared in hunter-gatherer settlements. Archaeological evidence also shows that early cities maintained many of the risk management strategies that had been essential for hunter-gatherer survival. They developed diverse food production systems to reduce dependence on single crops. They maintained extensive trade networks to ensure access to resources that weren't available locally. They created mutual assistance agreements with neighboring communities to provide support during times of crisis. Perhaps the most remarkable continuity between Pleistocene survival strategies and modern civilization is in the area of technological development. The innovation processes that drive modern technological advancement are essentially unchanged from the methods that early humans used to develop survival technologies. Modern research and development follows the same basic pattern that early humans used to improve their tools and techniques, identify a problem or challenge, experiment with different approaches, test and refine the most promising solutions, and share successful innovations with others who can further improve them. This process was already sophisticated by 40,000 years ago. Archaeological evidence shows that Pleistocene humans were conducting systematic experiments with different materials, techniques, and designs. They were testing their innovations under real-world conditions, making iterative improvements based on performance, and sharing successful designs across extended networks of human groups. The peer review systems that modern scientists use to evaluate and improve new discoveries are directly descended from the knowledge-sharing systems that early humans used to ensure that survival innovations were reliable and effective. The collaborative research networks that characterize modern science follow the same principles as the information-sharing networks that allowed early humans to continuously improve their survival technologies. Even the basic approach to innovation remains the same. Modern engineers solving complex technical problems use the same fundamental strategy that early humans used to develop better hunting weapons. Analyze the requirements, understand the constraints, experiment with different approaches, and continuously refine the design based on performance testing. The specialization that characterizes modern technical fields is also a direct descendant of Pleistocene survival specialization. Just as early human groups included specialists in tool-making, tracking, hunting, and other survival skills, modern societies include specialists in thousands of different technical areas, each building on the accumulated knowledge of previous generations. Most profound evidence for the continuity between Pleistocene survival strategies and modern human capabilities can be seen in how modern societies respond to large-scale challenges that threaten human survival and prosperity. Consider how the world responded to the COVID-19 pandemic. The basic strategy was immediately recognizable as a scaled-up version of approaches that early humans used to deal with survival threats. Rapid information sharing to understand the nature of the threat, coordinated response planning across multiple groups, development of new tools and techniques to address the challenge, and continuous refinement of approaches based on experience. The vaccine development process followed exactly the same innovation pattern that early humans used to develop new survival technologies. Systematic experimentation, collaborative knowledge sharing, iterative improvement, and rapid dissemination of successful solutions. The global coordination of pandemic response efforts used the same organizational principles that early humans used to coordinate large-scale hunting operations. Specialized roles for different participants, clear communication systems, shared objectives, and adaptive planning that could respond to changing conditions. Similarly, the global response to climate change follows patterns that can be traced directly back to Pleistocene survival strategies. Scientists are using the same pattern recognition and analytical skills that early humans used to understand environmental conditions and predict future challenges. Engineers are developing new technologies using the same experimental and collaborative approaches that early humans used to create better tools and techniques. The international cooperation required to address climate change uses the same principles that early humans used to coordinate activities across different groups. Shared understanding of common threats, collective planning for long-term survival, resource sharing to support group efforts, and adaptive strategies that can respond to changing conditions. But perhaps the most profound continuity between our Pleistocene ancestors and modern humans is psychological. The mental approaches, emotional responses, and social behaviors that characterize modern humans are still fundamentally shaped by the survival challenges that our ancestors faced. During the Pleistocene, modern humans still respond to threats with the same fight-or-flight responses that helped early humans survive predator encounters. We still form social bonds based on mutual support and resource-sharing patterns that first developed in hunter-gatherer societies. We still organize ourselves into specialized groups that collaborate on complex projects, using coordination strategies that trace back to Pleistocene hunting and gathering. Our fundamental assumptions about human nature, social organization, and problem-solving are all shaped by psychological adaptations that first developed during the Pleistocene. The competitive drives that motivate modern achievement, the cooperative impulses that make civilization possible, and the innovative thinking that drives technological advancement all have their roots in the survival strategies that allowed early humans to thrive in hostile environments. This psychological continuity explains why humans consistently respond to new challenges using approaches that follow Pleistocene patterns, even when those challenges are completely different from anything our ancestors ever faced. Whether we're exploring space, developing artificial intelligence, or managing global economies, we're still using fundamentally the same mental and social strategies that early humans used to survive alongside saber-toothed cats and cave bears. The most remarkable achievement of human civilization isn't any particular technology or social system. It's the development of survival strategies that can be scaled up to address challenges of any magnitude. The principles that allowed small groups of early humans to survive in hostile environments have proven to be applicable to challenges involving billions of people and global-scale problems. This scalability isn't accidental. It's the result of survival strategies that were inherently designed to be flexible, adaptive, and expandable. Early humans didn't just develop techniques for surviving specific threats. They developed general approaches to survival that could be applied to new challenges as they arose. The experimental mindset, collaborative problem-solving, technological innovation, and adaptive social organization that characterize modern human civilization are all expressions of survival strategies that were originally developed to deal with immediate physical threats to small groups of hunter-gatherers. But these strategies proved to be so effective and so flexible that they could be applied to increasingly complex and abstract challenges. The same approaches that worked for avoiding predators and finding food also worked for developing agriculture, building cities, creating global trade networks, and eventually exploring space. This suggests that the survival strategies developed by our Pleistocene ancestors weren't just temporary adaptations to specific environmental conditions. They were fundamental discoveries about how intelligent beings can successfully navigate complex, dangerous environments. Discoveries that remain relevant regardless of the scale or nature of the challenges involved. Today, as modern humans face new challenges like climate change, resource depletion, and space exploration, we're still using essentially the same strategies that our ancestors used to survive in a world of monsters. Analyze the challenge, develop new tools and techniques, coordinate our efforts across large groups, and continuously improve our approaches based on experience.